Hey everyone, welcome back to our subscription basket insert videos. This is going to be a tutorial for the July basket that you would have gotten in June. First thing we're going to do is we're going to start separating out our pieces. We're going to separate them by color. The first color we're going to start painting is white. So if you have your tape already down, I find the painter's tape is a lot easier for putting my pieces onto the table. That way they don't run away on me. So I'm going to just take all my little pieces that I'm going to be painting white and stick them right to the tape. There's a lot of little pieces on this one, so just make sure you try to get everything all at once. It makes it a little bit easier. If you're not sure which color or which pieces are which colors, the best thing to do is to look on our Facebook page or our website. There's pictures of this project as it's done and painted. That way you can sit there and you can look and figure out which pieces are going to be white. So as I have all of my white pieces on my tape, I'm going to go ahead and just sort out the rest of my pieces as well, putting up to the top all the pieces that are going to be red, and then all the pieces going to be the light blue. And then I'm off to the left-hand side. I'm going to be putting all the pieces that are going to be the dark blue. It gets a little tedious working with all these tiny little pieces, but once you're done painting everything, they turn out great. So that's my pile for red, my pile for dark blue, up to the pile for red, red. That's going to be the light blue. And now that I have all of my pieces off of my project piece, there are a couple pieces we're going to be painting right on the main project piece. So we're just going to leave that in easy distance for us to get to. First color we're going to start with is white. So you're going to want to pour a little bit of white. I usually prefer to use paper plates, but I was completely out of paper plates. So just make sure when you get the paint on your sponge that you're dabbing it off so that you don't have too much paint on your sponge, especially when it's time to paint these pieces that have writing on them. You want the writing to show through. So the less paint, the better. I would rather you have not enough paint on it and do multiple coats than have too much paint and then it'll end up filling in the letters, and then that way you won't be able to read it. So less paint is best. Just dab it straight up and down using the biggest end of your sponge. If you're using the makeup sponges, I use these. They come from Dollar General, and they're just a makeup sponge that are in wedge shape. So you're going to put a little bit of paint on the bottom of your sponge, just straight up and down, short taps for best results. And once you're done, you'll still be able to see all of the writing on the tag, and it'll be white. You could always obviously do this tag any color you want it to be. I chose white, and then at the end of the video, we're going to go through and we're going to add a little bit of color to the edges of it. Still working with the white. I'm going to go through and I'm going to do the rest of the white pieces that are already stuck to my tape. For my tape, I use just a regular frog tape. It is a painter's tape. I curl the edges under so that way they'll stick to the table, and then make sure it's sticky side up to put all of my pieces on. Here you could use a paintbrush if you prefer. I find that the sponge is just a lot faster, especially for these little pieces. And then that way you're not getting too much paint on the edges of your pieces either. We want to try to keep them as pristine as we can. Just using the wide end of my sponge still, straight up and down, covering all these pieces with some white paint. It's hard to tell the difference between the white paint and the wood, but I promise you there is white paint on them. So now we're going to go with that one there, and then up at the top of some of these pieces we also need to do a little bit of white. With these pieces, just make sure you're painting it on the section that needs to be painted that color. Try not to go over the edge into the other pieces too much, just in case there is a piece over there that needs to be another color. Most of these pieces end up being layered on top of each other, so things get covered. But just on the off case, there are two of them that are right next to each other that you just have to make sure you're not putting paint on the wrong side. So then we have to do the top of this piece, just that little tiny section there. That's where one of the wicks will go into for the firecracker. Now that we have all of our white pieces done, we're going to go ahead and move on to the light blue. This is called the Dixie Belle Blue. Just pour a little bit into your paint palette or onto your plate, whichever you have. And we're going to go ahead and move all of these pieces off that were painted white so that we can go ahead and start putting our pieces on that need to be painted blue. Now that we have all of our light blue pieces lined up, we're just going to use the same sponge that we used for the white. White will just kind of blend with this light blue, and it's not going to be a big deal that there still might be a little bit of white left on your sponge. Make sure you get enough blue on there and just start sponging over top of all of these pieces. One of these pieces again has the writing on it, the same as the white tag did. So just make sure that when you're using it that there is not too much paint on your sponge. You don't want to fill in those lettering. Make sure you're dabbing off as much excess paint as you can. Just very, very gently tapping the top of this piece with the flat end of your sponge. Same with all of the pieces that have the lines on them that are part of the tops of the firecrackers. We want the lines to show through, so you're just going to use a very minimal amount of paint on them, tap off any of the excess. Make sure it's evenly covered. As we get to the last piece there, we just have to do the top of it. Once my hand is out of the way, you can see what I'm doing. We just need to do the top of it where one of the wicks will go in, just to give it a little bit of color so that there's not naked wood there. I'm going to speed up the video a little bit just to take off all the little light blue pieces, and we're going to put on their dark blue pieces. But do not go too far with that light blue sponge. I forgot to do a piece, so we're going to go through and we're going to do that right now. It is on the main piece. We're going to do the far left one. The whole thing gets painted with the light blue. Just make sure you're not going too close to the one next to it, because that one will end up being painted red and not all of it will get covered, so you don't want the two colors to blend into each other. This is a pretty bad camera angle, but there you can see. So we did the far left one is light blue. Now we are ready to do the dark blue. We're going to do dark blue on all of the pieces that we've put on our tape now. Make sure you get all of the excess paint off of your sponge. I ran out of space in the center of my palette, so I start using one of the other palette piece wells. Just get a little bit of the excess off. So we're going to use the sponge and we're just going to cover in all of the dark blue firecrackers that are on the main piece. There's only one of them that's going to be dark blue, and it's going to be the third one from the right, the tallest one there. Again, just try to get as close inside the lines as you can. Most of it would be covered if you go outside a little bit, but we don't want to get too sloppy with it. And now we're going to go ahead and paint the dark blue on all of our pieces. For this piece here, we just have to do the top half there. Then all of the little tiny pieces get fully covered in dark blue. Dark blue goes on really nicely, so that's usually a one coat and done kind of color. Most all of the colors, if you notice, I'm only doing one coat, and that's all I need. So that's a nice thing about this paint. Now that we've finished all of the dark blue pieces, we're going to go ahead and take all of these pieces off and replace them with the red. Put all the sponges to the side that you already have. We have the light blue sponge, the dark blue sponge. Now we're going to have a red sponge. So we're going to go through and we're going to paint all of these little tiny pieces. They should be all the pieces that you have left. They're going to get painted red. And then there's a couple of the firecrackers right on the main piece that are going to end up being painted red as well. As we finish up painting up all of our little pieces, we're going to go up to the main piece and we're going to paint the second from the left is going to be painted red. And then the far right one is going to be painted red. You will have a couple pieces that look like they're not going to be painted. They will have pieces layered on top of them. So there are a couple of the firecrackers on the main piece that don't need to be painted at all. So at this point, you should have all of your main pieces painted. All of the little pieces are painted. I was hiding another tray underneath that I forgot that I had. So I'm going to use that and use the middle of it to do my blending. So now on all of our red pieces, we're going to take a sponge that has just the tiniest bit of the dark blue on it. And we're just going to give a little bit of shading to the red pieces. You can shade with any color that you want. I prefer when I'm working with my red pieces, I like to shade with the dark blue. You could always shade with the white, you could shade with the light blue, but for my own personal preference, I prefer the dark blue. Now, as you could see there, I had a very harsh line for my shading. So I'm going through with a red sponge just to do a little bit of touch up so I can try it again. I didn't like the way it came out the first time, and that's the nice thing with paint. When you don't like it, you just do it over. So now that I have muted that line a little bit, I am going to let it dry and give it a chance to dry up a little bit before I go back to work with it again. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking all of my pieces and I am putting just a tiny bit of dark blue just on one edge. The edge I chose is going to be the left side of all of my pieces. So I'm flipping them around because I'm right-handed, and I'm just dabbing a tiny, tiny bit onto the left edge of my pieces. That's just going to create a nice shadowing effect when everything gets put together. Again, flipping my piece over, just going to do so that way I can do it on the left side. I want the left edge of my pieces just to have a tiny bit of that dark blue on it. Just a little bit of the dark blue. Go ahead and do that for all of your red pieces. Make sure you're doing it on the same side. Make sure it's going on the right side, the correct side of where you want your shading to be. Now that I've given that piece up top a little bit of chance to dry, I'm going to go ahead and do it again. So now that you can look at it, it's feathered out a little bit. It's not as harsh of a line as it was originally. So I'm just going to go through and touch it up just a little bit, make it look the way I want, add a little bit more of the dark blue right to the edge, just to give it that little bit of shadowing. And now that I'm done with the dark blue on the red pieces, I'm going to take a tiny bit of the light blue, and I stuck my thumb in the white paint on that. I'm going to take a little bit of the light blue, load up my sponge, dab it off onto the paper towel just to make sure I don't have too much on it. And then I'm going to use the light blue to shade all of my white pieces. So I'm just going to go through and dab a tiny bit of the light blue onto the white pieces, just like we did with the dark blue onto the red. Making sure you're putting it on the correct side for your shadowing, or whichever side you want it to be on. I generally try to have it all on the same side for at least the same color of items. That way, it just doesn't look kind of silly. As I'm dabbing a little bit of the light blue onto this white piece, I don't like the way it was looking. It had a little bit of a harsh line to it, so I'm just taking a little bit of white to touch it up. Put a little bit of white over top of it and just kind of mute that line a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and move on to the rest of my pieces and still add just a little bit of the light blue to it. I was trying to line my pieces up, but that was the wrong piece. That's the correct piece right there. Just to make sure everything is looking the way I want it to look. So those are all going to be stacked on top of one of the other pieces to create a firecracker. So going through and finishing up the rest of my white pieces with the light blue, making sure I'm doing the correct sides on everything. And once I'm done with the white pieces, then I'm going to use the same light blue color, and I'm going to use it on my dark blue. Again, this is going to come down to a personal choice. You could always use a white on the dark blue pieces if you'd prefer. I haven't used red yet, so I'm not sure how well that would look, but that's always an option as well if you wanted to give it a try. Going through in all these little tiny stars and just adding a tiny bit of the light blue to them to give them a little bit of shadow. Actually, at this point, with the light color, we're going to give it a highlight. Once you're done with that sponge, I decided that I wasn't done with my colors yet, so I go ahead and I cut off the end of my sponge. That way I have a nice fresh sponge to work with. And then I'm going to go through with a little bit of the white, dab off all the excess paint. Make sure you don't have too much. And I'm going to use the white for my light blue pieces. Again, just adding a little bit of highlight to them. I like to use the white on the light blue pieces. You could use the dark blue on the light blue pieces or even the red, but for my personal preference, I like to use the white. And again, I'm just going to do a little bit of shadow or highlighting on the main firecracker piece itself. There's that little light blue piece that's there, so I just add a little bit of white to the edge of it to give it some highlighting. I had forgotten to do the highlighting on this firecracker that has the dark blue on it. So here I am trying to use my mangled sponge that has a little bit of light blue paint on it to give it a little bit of highlighting. It's not working the way I wanted it to, so I'm trying to blend it with my finger. Yep, not working. So I end up just going at it as best as I can, holding onto the sponge, and then just deciding to take my sponge that I just cut to get some nice white on it and put it in the light blue and just kind of give that edge a little bit of some highlighting to it. Trying to blend it in as best as I can taking a look at it, not really liking the way it looks, so I take a little bit of the dark blue from the dark blue sponge, go over top of it, blend it out. From here, we can either start assembling or we can work on some accent lines. I am kind of a space cadet, so I just started assembling. And then after I started assembling, realized that I wanted to do my accent lines. So if you're going to do accent lines, I do highly, highly recommend to do them before everything is assembled. Once everything is assembled, there's different layers to it, different heights. So it makes it more difficult to add on your accent lines with a steady hand. If you're going to do the accent lines, make sure you do it on your pieces before you start assembling everything. And I also realized here that I had forgotten to do the part where the wick goes on one of the main firecrackers. So I'm taking just a little bit of the white paint and just dabbing it on the top of that little piece there. That way there's no naked wood showing. And here I'm adding on the light blue boom to the firecracker. And this is when I'm starting to realize I wanted to do my accent lines. And I'm kind of panicking a little bit because I already started gluing. So let's put the cap on the glue and reevaluate our life decisions. I have a very fine white paint marker that I'm just going to add some accent lines down the sides of my pieces. I alternate with some straight lines and a couple of like dots and just kind of go with the flow. And if you need some inspiration on how you want yours to look, like I said, you can always take a look at the picture of mine, either on our website or on our Facebook page, and you can kind of get an idea of how many accent lines you want to do based off of that. If I had a video assistant, this is when I would have told them to zoom in, but unfortunately I do videos by myself, so I didn't have the ability to zoom in, and I apologize. That's why I go to our website or our Facebook page, find the still photo of these projects, and that's the best way to get some inspiration for your accent lines. Throughout the rest of this video, I'm going to be assembling and gluing my pieces and working on my accent lines at the same time. I'm alternating between both. So you can either fast forward through this part of the video, or if you need some assistance with the assembly of it, then I would recommend just continue watching. I'm going to speed it up a little bit though, so that way you don't have to sit here for the next 15 minutes. Quick note here, as you're assembling these firecrackers that have multiple pieces to create one firecracker, I highly recommend to start from the bottom of the firecracker and work your way up. I unfortunately did not, and then by the time I was done and finished, my pieces did not line up correctly because I had shifted my pieces up too high when I started. So I highly recommend working from the bottom and gluing all your pieces all the way up. And then that way when you get to the top, where it lands is where it lands, and that's perfectly fine. I'd hate for you to work from the top and work your way down to the bottom and then not have your bottom line up correctly. So highly recommend to take your time, work from the bottom, and then go on up. Because as you can see, I'm putting in the last piece here, and my pieces don't line up. I have a gap between the top piece and that second piece down, the red piece. And with our super glue that we have, there is no way to get those pieces off. Here I am frantically trying to get those pieces off, but they have already set and they are stuck there for good. So unfortunately, this project is just not going to turn out the way I want right off the bat. So learn from my mistakes. Start gluing from the bottom and work your way up. So as we're going through the rest of this video, I'm just adding the rest of my accent lines to my pieces, adding a little bit of curvature to them, and just a little bit of spice to it, just to give it some interest, not so two-dimensional, and gluing my pieces on as I go. I do recommend, it is easier to do all of your accent lines first and then glue your pieces after. I apparently was impatient while I was doing this, and I was trying to kind of multitask. And I always recommend, before you start gluing, to put your pieces on dry first, just to have an idea of where everything fits, make sure everything lines up, make sure you don't have any naked wood hanging out, and everything is painted as it should be. After you do that, then to make sure everything fits, then you can start gluing. Again, I apparently was being impatient today, and I did not do that. Highly recommend putting it in together and then adding your glue. And I'm looking at it, there's one last little piece that needed to be painted. I am painting it a light blue. It's just that little tab piece on this firecracker. So just make sure you do that before you start gluing everything together as well. And here I am. I have learned from my first mistake. I am working from the bottom up, making sure everything is fitting correctly while I glue those stripes on. And as you're finishing up with your gluing, there's just a few last minute things to do. Adding a little bit of dark blue to the edge of my tag to give it some interest. And then you have a back tab, so you're going to glue the back tab to the back side of the bottom part of your thing so it doesn't wiggle around when you put it in your basket. Add some ribbon to your tag and kind of hook it onto the bottom. That way it's there where you want it. And that's your basket.